Hello there, and welcome back to the Sleepy Disclosure Project. Tonight we start with a question. What if our planet is the result of an ancient ongoing experiment? Earth, after all, sits on a knife's edge of perfection. Water at the ready, seasons balanced by tilt, tides steadied by a companion moon. Some whisper this looks less like random chance and more like deliberate settings on a cosmic test. So tonight we ask, what if Earth itself was never just a home, but an ancient experiment? Picture the Earth as it drifts against a black ocean of stars, a small blue sphere caught in orbit, perfectly balanced as though set on display in a glass case. From that distance, the planet hardly appears real at all. The glow of white clouds circles its surface like slow-moving brushstrokes. Oceans turn sunlight into mirrors, and thin patterns of land lie stitched between the seas. Against the vastness of space, it looks too fragile to exact, as though each factor, light, water and air, was tuned by someone who wanted it all to run just right. In that image, Earth does not feel like an accident. It feels staged, preserved, and almost curated. And the first thing that stands out is its position. 93 million miles from a star that burns but does not overwhelm us, the Earth sits in what scientists call a habitable band. Too close, and oceans would boil away before life could even begin. Too far, and every lake and river would be locked in silence beneath miles of ice. Instead, it rests at the one interval where surface temperatures remain moderate, keeping most of the water moving freely. Astronomers name this the Goldilocks zone, but that title carries a strange undertone. It describes not only warmth or cold, but the kind of precision you'd expect if someone had measured with intention. Beneath the surface, another mystery churns. The molten iron at Earth's core never stops moving, twisting in great currents that generate invisible strength around the planet. That motion forms a magnetic field, a shield big enough to turn away streams of charged particles pouring from the sun at incredible speeds. Without it, radiation would erode the atmosphere piece by piece until the planet was left barren. A nearby example of this outcome lies close to hand. Mars once held water across wide plains, yet today only red dust whips through its thin air. Stripped and exposed, the traces of rivers on its surface read less like ancient geology and more like scars, reminders of what happens when no barrier stands between a planet and its star. Yet balance doesn't only come from within. Look upward into the night and you find Earth partnered with a companion that sets it apart. The Moon is unusually large compared to the planet it orbits, unlike nearly every other pairing in our system. That proportion turns into stability. Its pull steadies Earth's axial tilt, keeping it near 23 degrees. Without that balance, the tilt might lurch unpredictably, sometimes steepening, sometimes flattening, dragging seasons into chaos. Crops would wither beneath unexpected droughts. Harsh cold might linger for decades in what had once been temperate valleys. Instead, the rhythm of seasons has stayed reliable for thousands of years, slow enough for cities and cultures to grow in response to the passing pattern of heat and frost. In this arrangement, coincidence begins to look deliberate. The Moon's pull is more than a stabilizer. Its influence reaches into the oceans themselves. Twice each day, the sea rises and falls as lunar gravity moves billions of tons of water like a planetary breath. In the margins of that movement, on tidal flats, in pools left by retreating waves, life first adapted to the press of land and sky. Some researchers suggest that without that constant stirring of water against the shore, advanced organisms may have struggled to leave the sea at all. To describe it plainly, the Moon became both clock and tutor, shaping the habit of the Earth and the evolution of the species that live upon it. Above ground, another calibrated element shapes every breath you take. Earth's atmosphere carries a recipe that is striking in its balance. Almost 4/5 of it consists of nitrogen, a stable gas that does little on its own but gives a necessary cushion. Just over 1/5 is oxygen, reactive enough to support complex bodies with lungs and hearts. A narrow trace of carbon dioxide helps trap sunlight, turning cold air into livable warmth without running to extremes. On most worlds studied so far, atmospheres lean into imbalance. Too much carbon smothers, too little oxygen suffocates, methane collapses into poison. Yet here, the proportions fall into that improbable window where forests can expand in one region and coral reefs thrive in another, all under the same sky. This air wraps tightly around water, the element constantly crossing boundaries of land and atmosphere. It is not locked in one form, but travels a cycle. Ocean becomes vapour. Vapour returns as rain. Water freezes into ice or runs back through rivers to the sea. Each shift regulates the planet's climate, distributing heat and carving landscapes over time. Without that cycle, Earth would risk the fates of Venus or Mars, planets stalled into deserts or frozen wastes where water lives in only one state. Each drop that falls from a cloud onto the soil carries the quiet weight of calibration, as though tested and proved in endless repetition. Those who rely solely on scientific reasoning sometimes invoke what's known as the anthropic principle. The argument is straightforward. You only notice such perfect tuning because you are alive inside it. From another vantage point, maybe there are countless planets with failed balances, ones where life never reached consciousness to remark on it. If this is our bias, then Earth only appears extraordinary because we look from within. And yet, critics of that frame counter that even if perspective shapes perception, the sheer precision of conditions here refuses to feel casual. It feels like someone marked off margins before letting the ink of physics spill across the page. If this is a set of rules, perhaps each variable resembles a knob adjusted on a machine. Distance dialed just right, rotation secured, field switched on, gases mixed, water locked into cycles. Then the question emerges. Why? To what end? Some imagine our entire biosphere as the controlled run of a vast experiment, with difficulty balanced not too heavily in our favour, but not crushing enough to end us at the start. The planetary chamber may not differ so much from laboratories where people today refine ecosystems in glass containers, only draped across an astronomical scale. That testbed image gains another unsettling layer when you shift the angle slightly. The moon itself, always in position, never turning a new face, seems almost too suited for observation. Across history it has been high above every battle, every harvest, every migration. An eternal companion with line of sight to every step civilization has made. To some it suggests the presence of a hidden recorder, patient enough to monitor without interfering, present enough to shape tides and seasons so the experiment continues in rhythm. Every time we return to study the moon, more puzzles rise. It is older than we once thought, carrying isotopes that match Earth, yet formed separately in detail difficult to explain. Its placement allows total eclipses that cover the sun with uncanny precision, creating stages of awe for those who watch from below. Even seismic data from landings describe reverberations that sound more like echoes, moving through a hollow shell rather than a solid stone. Observers disagree on how to interpret these findings. Still, each report adds to the impression that our satellite was never a mere accident. It was, some whisper, positioned. Let the frame widen here. Our world shows a long record of tuning, from molten depths to shifting skies. Each factor shelters life with a reliability our neighbouring planets cannot claim. Mars is rust and desert now. Venus cloaks itself in burning clouds. Even many exoplanets detected beyond face either freezing gloom or furnace-like heat, their orbits falling outside life's thin band. Yet Earth, by some measure, stayed locked exactly where endurance was possible. That pattern carries the weight of repetition, repeating like an equation traced in chalk, too consistent to ignore. And while science offers explanations for each piece, the spin of iron, orbital mechanics, atmospheric chemistry, the symmetry of the whole still leaves you listening for intention, as though someone were waiting for a student's answer in the hush of a classroom. If this is a chamber, then tests might extend beyond the survival of species into the measure of behaviour within them. For a moment, think of the person who plants seed after seed, because the reliability of spring grants him courage. Think of the voyager crossing oceans because tides and stars align in repeating cycles. Civilization itself rests on faith in that precision. Every city, every trade route began with trust that the conditions of Earth would hold steady enough to risk building a life out of stone, wood, and expectation. If that is not a form of calibration, what is? So the unsettling question lingers. What if the environment you accept as background, the cycle of seasons, the stable breathing atmosphere, the protective field, is itself the testing material? The test doesn't need to declare itself. It only needs to see how subjects adapt within its quiet confines. And if that is the case, then the moon may not merely be companion or clock. It could be both the stabilizer and the lens, keeping Earth habitable while always watching. Through this lens, even its familiar light takes on another colour. The full face glows like an ancient lamp above dark oceans, reflecting sunlight whether you stand in deserts or city streets. It gives farmers nights to work, hunters nights to stalk, lovers nights to wander. But it also supplies a never-blinking vantage point, high enough to observe every change across continents. Imagine placing a mirror in the corner of a laboratory cage, subtle, passive, yet capturing all. Our satellite holds the same position, establishing what might be the most suspicious balancing act in the solar system. No single puzzle solves this arrangement, but the combined weight of them sharpens the outline of something more deliberate than accident. The Goldilocks balance, the invisible shield of magnetism, the air made to be lived in, the ceaseless cycling of water, the silent calibration of tilt and tide, all these converge to sketch the silhouette of an intention. Whether or not we name it as design, it begins to resemble one. And if Earth itself feels like a room fitted for an examination, then perhaps the moon above is more than companion. It might be an overseer of every stage within the test, which leaves a final cloak of unease hanging over the night sky. If conditions here amount to a setup, then parameters must exist, written somewhere between geology and orbit, recorded in the unbroken turning of oceans and seasons. And if parameters exist, they must have been set. That single implication stretches beyond science and reigns into speculation. Who or what keeps those controls? Perhaps the answer hides not in invisible dimensions, but directly before us, in the strangely poised companion we all take for granted. Its face never turning, its gaze never leaving. It might be the strongest clue that none of this ever began by chance at all. Step outside tonight and look up. The moon hangs in the sky with a quietness that feels both steady and uncanny. At first glance it looks ordinary, a pale disk softened by haze, but it is in fact one of the oddest companions any planet in our solar system has. Its size, its influence, even its presence, each carries questions that have not settled. The farther astronomy progresses, the more the moon begins to resemble not just an accident of nature, but a carefully placed mechanism balancing Earth's fragile conditions for life. The most obvious curiosity appears in its proportions. At roughly a quarter the width of our planet, the moon is far too large for the role of a satellite. Most moons are dwarfs to their hosts. Mars's two companions, Phobos and Deimos, are so small they appear more like captured asteroids than proper moons. Even the largest moons of Jupiter and Saturn, magnificent though they are, look like tiny beads compared with the gas giants that hold them. Yet Earth and its satellite present an almost eerie symmetry, more like a planet double than the expected parent and child pattern. Astronomers have long noticed this imbalance, because it stands out the moment you compare it to the rest of the solar system. Here lies a ratio without another match. The effects of that size reach far deeper than appearance. Without the moon's force tugging steadily at Earth, the planet's tilt could swing wildly across deep time. At present, Earth leans at about 23.5 degrees, giving us our seasons. If that tilt shifted erratically, we would not recognise the world at all. Summers could scorch poles to bare rock, winters could smother equators beneath ice sheets. Climate would become an unpredictable pendulum rather than the gentler rhythm we evolved within. Yet the moon acts like a gyroscope, its steady pull keeping Earth's angle in a narrow band. The byproduct is stable weather long enough for forests, seas and human societies to anchor themselves. Without this silent stabiliser, complex life may not have found the space to grow. Its influence does not stop with seasons. Down along the coastlines, you can hear its invisible hand in the wash and retreat of tides. The moon drags oceans into constant breathing, creating tidal pools and coastal shallows where nutrients swirl. For billions of years, those shifting environments offered a cradle where molecules focused, mingled, and assembled into life. The force that makes beachgoers collect shells and fishermen wait for high water may also have been the hidden midwife of biology itself. Every tide rolling against the rocks carries echoes of those ancient hours when chemistry first found self-sustaining form. Despite this close intimacy, mystery clouds the story of the moon's birth. The prevailing idea speaks of a violent beginning, a world-sized body slamming into early Earth, ejecting molten debris that clumped together and cooled as the satellite we know. On the surface, this giant impact theory explains the moon's presence. Yet now and then the details falter. Earth and moon share isotope fingerprints so similar they appear cut from the same stone, raising puzzles about how an entirely foreign body could leave behind something so close in chemistry. The moon's surprisingly stable orbit, and its very survival after such a cosmic collision, pushes the theory into uneasy territory. Supporters suggest more refined physics may resolve the gaps. Others whisper the neatness of our planet's companion could point to something more deliberate than chaos. Myths carry their own peculiar testimony. Across cultures stretched by oceans and centuries, tales speak of a time before the moon arrived. In Greece, some traditions preserved the memory of Arcadians who walked a sky with no lunar light. In Colombia, indigenous stories describe an age when the moon appeared suddenly, bringing change to the sky's character. Whether these are poetic inventions or faint echoes of human memory passed through oral lineages is impossible to untangle. But it is striking how often the theme emerges, as if the moon's arrival left a mark too sudden or too extraordinary to forget. Perhaps no feature sharpens this strangeness more than eclipses. The sun, vast beyond measure, stands around 400 times larger than the moon, yet our satellite orbits at just the right distance to appear nearly the same size in our sky. Because of that uncanny ratio, the moon can slide directly across the sun and block it in perfect symmetry. Total eclipses turn day to night, the corona flaring around a precise disk. The odds of such an arrangement seem vanishingly small, yet here it is, time after time, visible from Earth and Earth alone. Some dismiss it as mere coincidence in celestial geometry. Others suspect its perfection looks unsettlingly engineered, as if built for the very purpose of focusing attention skyward. Beyond spectacle, the moon fed the practical structure of human life. Its phases created humanity's first dependable clock. Crescents waned and waxed with predictable rhythm, teaching farmers when to plant and when to harvest. Sailors learned navigation with its cycles. Priests timed rituals to its glow. Before mechanical timekeepers, the moon gave order to societies, aligning human activity with the heavens overhead. Its influence extended beyond nature and into civilization's architecture, essentially training early people to move through the year with rhythm built into the sky. Even when machines followed it to its surface, the moon answered with more riddles. Apollo missions left behind seismometers. When impact struck, the data revealed vibrations that rang for far longer than expected, like a bell's tone decaying into stillness. The moon's relatively low density compared to Earth had already puzzled scientists. Now its unusual acoustics fueled questions about what lay inside. Researchers lean toward an explanation of dry, fractured crust and strange interior makeup, but speculation flourished outside laboratories, whispering of vast hollows or internal designs not natural at all. The science gave sparse clues, leaving ample room for curiosity to wander. Look closer at its face and you find anomalies to match. Mascons, areas of concentrated mass beneath the surface, pull stronger than surrounding ground, a mystery not fully explained by ordinary geology. Vast seas of what appears to be frozen basalt stretch across regions, dark scars formed by unimaginable volcanic activity. The crust shows uneven thickness, heavier on one side than the other, as if the moon were built with a symmetry from the start. Each quirk stirs debate. Collectively, they raise the unsettling suggestion that the moon may not obey the simple narrative of a spun-off fragment. It carries marks of something stranger, something perhaps arranged. Naturally, mainstream research leans toward measured solutions, impact models, orbital dynamics, interior layering. Each hypothesis solves one piece, but others break loose in turn. Supporters of alternative views suggest that so many coincidences feel like too much harmony for pure chance. Could the moon be more than a byproduct of violent origin stories? Could it be a tool crafted by hands unknown, tuned precisely to calm Earth's wobble, stir its oceans and mark its time? Even if we accept only the grounded aspects, the moon already appears as Earth's engineer. It steadies rotation, stirs life from oceans, gifts our first calendar. Remove it, and Earth would be unrecognisable, not a home for human stories, but a volatile sphere tossed between extremes. Yet myths and science both press us further. The question creeps in not whether the moon protects, but why such a precise system exists at all. Standing outside beneath its glow, you feel the atmosphere shift. The moon is quiet, but not mute. Its fingerprints trail across biology, weather, culture, and imagination. It occupies too many roles for a mere satellite. Many who study this pattern admit it carries the texture of design, whether by rare alignment of chance or by something we cannot name. From another angle, it begins to look less like a neighbour, more like an installed instrument, a device so well fitted to Earth's needs that its absence would unravel our entire history. If that possibility holds even a grain of truth, then questions about our myths reach deeper. Stories of watchers, sky dwellers, and beings that shaped life may not have been spun from nothing. They could be inherited memories of those who placed Earth's improbable companion in its perfect orbit. And if the moon has been watching all along, perhaps those ancient tales were closer to memory than invention. The night sky over ancient Sumer hung with a brilliance modern cities rarely allow. Clay tablets waited under the flickering glow of oil lamps, while scribes carved wedge-shaped marks with steady hands. Their eyes traced the heavens like surveyors charting a land they could never touch. Stars moved with measured rhythm, each alignment recorded as if part of a ledger. Among these notes appeared names of beings said to descend from above. The Anunnaki, described less as distant gods, and more as visitors who observed, judged, and positioned themselves as keepers of human fate. For the people shaping history at the river's edge, the sky was not silent. It was crowded, attentive, alive with watchers. The motif was never confined to one plain between rivers. Across the continents, echoes carried the same story. In Babylon, their temples framed the planets with obsessive care, treating the motions of Saturn or Jupiter as messages from heavenly assessors. Far to the west, communities along the Amazon told of star beings who came down swathed in light, who offered knowledge of crops, medicine, and survival. In colder climates, Norse seers told of figures called the Sky Watchers, brushing against the same theme through a different tongue. Even the scattered cultures of Pacific Islands spoke of eyes above the waves, spirits that measured the conduct of fishing crews and village chiefs. Separated by oceans, they nonetheless described the same pattern. Beings overhead who not only illuminated myth, but acted as judges of conduct. The Bible itself preserves fragments of this thread, though recast in its own theology. The Nephilim are introduced as offspring of sons of God who came down to the daughters of men. Their stature and power set them apart, half-divine hybrids monitored but tolerated only briefly. Later texts condemn this crossing of boundaries, yet the figure remains, intermediaries spawned by those who descended to mingle with humanity. For some listeners then and now, this reads like another record of surveyors who blurred the border between observation and participation. In North America, elders spoke of star people. These were not metaphors for ancestors or distant planets, but entities remembered as descending figures. Oral histories say they taught skills, the tracking of seasons, the preparation of maize, rituals of balance with the land. They were teachers, perhaps examiners, whose gifts often came with conditions about how those gifts were to be used. Some whisper this looks strikingly like intervention within a measured trial, the handing of tools to see how humanity would wield them. Move farther south and stone carvings present feathered serpents, luminous beings from above who arrive to teach and often to judge. In Maya and Aztec traditions, these sky gods shaped creation itself, but their role didn't end with myths of beginnings. They descend throughout stories to inspect offerings, correct rituals, or destroy communities that failed their standards. Their imagery twines around temple walls because the idea of evaluation, of being measured, was central to the way societies organized their daily life. Farmers planted crops with half their minds on these luminous overseers, gauging whether their devotion met requirements set from beyond earth. From cuneiform lines to oral tales, from murals to epic poetry, a shared thread passes through human archives, the presence of those above who look downward. What deepens the puzzle is the independence of these descriptions. Sumer in South America, Scandinavia, and the Pacific had no roads linking their storytellers, yet they retained a matching structure of sky-born auditors. It is one thing to note humanity's common tendency to search the stars for parental figures. It is another to find traditions separated by oceans, holding the same specific images of sudden arrivals, teachings followed by periods of judgment, and the motifs of beings who not only appear but watch with purpose. Some traditions even suggest a before and after. There was life prior to the arrival of these beings, then an abrupt shift, a night where strangers appeared above the horizon, engraving themselves into memory so firmly that villagers spoke of time before the watchers, as though history itself began only after they came. The appearance split calendars into the old world and one shaped by constant observation. For the first witnesses, it must have felt less like myth than announcement. The test had started and new overseers had arrived. Scholars often attribute such recurring images to shared psychology. Humanity projects upward, they say, and invents guardians because the sky offers the perfect canvas, vast, remote, impossible to disprove. Supporters of this reading see the Anunnaki, the star people, and the feathered serpents as reflections of the same parental desire, cosmic figures functioning as mirrors of human need, not as records of real arrivals. Yet others counter with a different hypothesis. The global synchrony of these accounts is too tight. The resemblance is beyond simple archetype. In that view, each tale is not invention but testimony, oral record of examiners who maintained humanity as a trial subject. Whatever their origin, the story does not remain trapped in antiquity. Move forward through centuries and you find aircraft-shaped lights hovering in lonely skies, reports of abductions in farmhouses, mysterious figures known as men in black silencing witnesses. They replay the same script, watchers seen or felt, their presence undeniable to those who encounter them. Critics dismiss these as imagination shaped by modern fears, yet the continuity is uncanny. From stone tablets to glowing lights on radar, the form changes but the role remains fixed. The watchers never quite depart, they only adapt. Government records feed the persistence of this narrative. Roswell's secrecy left questions that decades of dismissal never erased. More recently, Pentagon reports confirmed the presence of unidentified aerial phenomena exceeding acknowledged technology. These admissions are cautious, no firm declaration of intent or origin, but their existence alone preserves the suspicion of continuous surveillance. Some whisper that it reads like official confirmation, not of extraterrestrial visitation directly, but of a mystery consistent with the oldest stories carved in clay. As technology expanded, satellites, radar, telescopes scanning the wide vault above, the sightings adjusted. Where ancient myths tell of sudden open arrivals, modern encounters are fleeting, hidden, layered in ambiguity. Lights vanish before aircraft intercept. Footage records shapes barely visible. Supporters suggest this resembles the discretion of long-term observers who shift tactics when their subjects develop detection tools. If humanity were once easy to monitor in the open sky of Sumer, by the 20th century we required subtler methods of surveillance. The examiners, if real, stayed just ahead of our instruments. This discretion has not erased continuity. Carvings of winged figures mark Assyrian palace walls. Glowing shapes frame themselves in thermal imaging filmed by military craft. In both, attentive presences hover beyond reach but not beyond record. The through line stretches across millennia, always in proximity yet never fully claiming space within human architecture, always framed as watchers, never neighbours. The motif endures. It is worth pausing on that endurance. Many myths fade when collective memory forgets their function, yet the watchers persist, both in temple stone and in infrared images captioned in modern reports. The survival suggests a need to hold on to their presence as part of a wider narrative of being judged, taught, or tested. If Earth is a trial, then their function is consistent, auditors who measure each stage. And if that is the case, then human history might not be purely our tale of triumphs and failures, but a ledger kept under unblinking observation. For the listener, this raises one last unsettling implication. If a presence has remained overhead throughout human epochs, perhaps guiding or perhaps only observing, then the chronicles we call history may not be independent at all. We may be pages written within an experiment still running, and if tales, sightings and disclosures are the traces of watchers marking progress, then the next clues may not be in the sky but on the ground, artifacts left behind to test how closely we notice what does not belong. The museum is closed, its corridors swept of visitors, its echoing rooms dim except for the soft lap of fluorescent lights against polished floors. The air is still, dotted with dust motes floating through beams of security lamps. In the far corner of a gallery, half hidden from the casual stroll of daytime crowds, rests a corroded fragment of bronze and wood. It looks fragile, its gears seized, its plates fractured by centuries underwater, yet it bears the imprint of something uncanny. Pulled from the depths near a small Greek island over a century ago, this device should not exist. It is the Antikythera mechanism, a machine from around 50 BCE, its intricacies stranger than anything we were told to expect from the antique world. A tourist in broad daylight might pass it as a curiosity, but in this after-hours quiet it feels more like a warning, the sort of object that glances backward at you with equal interest, as if you are the one behind glass. Examine it closely and the puzzle deepens. Encased originally in a modest-sized wooden box, it contained bronze gears with teeth carved so finely that even clockmakers of the 18th century would have admired them. These wheels and dials were not decorative, they translated mathematics into movement. Turn the crank and the mechanism once traced the journeys of the sun and moon across the sky, predicted eclipses, and even displayed the shifting calendars of Olympian Games. 30 or more gears interlocked in harmony so precise it defied understanding when first uncovered in 1901. To imagine shipwrecked sailors carrying this machine across ancient waters is to rewrite what we thought we knew of Greece. It suggested astronomy anchored not only in mathematics but in technology centuries ahead of its time. Even now, reconstructions can only gesture at its original brilliance, as if we are guessing the outline of a mind that slipped the linear march of history. Some whisper that it was not simply ahead of its time, but out of place, bearing wisdom no culture of its known era could claim. Critics reply that Greek intellect was always underestimated, that lost craftsmen simply pushed their skill to levels rarely preserved. Yet even this more tempered view leaves its own echoing question. Why only one such machine? Where did the line of inventors who fashioned it vanish to, leaving no surviving siblings hidden in ruins? If it emerged as part of a tradition of engineering, that tradition dissolved without a trace. The result is an artifact that stands alone, stranded outside its proper age, a single candle lit in a chamber that quickly returned to dark. Walk a bit further, and imagine another odd artifact unearthed not from a coastline but from the soil of Mesopotamia in the 1930s. A small clay jar, its humble size concealing a greater story. Inside the cylinder sat a roll of copper, pierced by an iron rod and sealed with bitumen. Fill it with vinegar or another acidic liquid, and the jar produces current, however faint. Later called the Baghdad battery, it raised eyebrows because it seemed to anticipate electrochemical cells by nearly 2,000 years. Electricity was not supposed to exist in such an ancient setting. If it did, what was it used for? Some suggested electroplating thin layers of gold onto objects. Others imagined ceremonial use, or even medicinal shocks. The truth remains unknown. In the quiet gallery, though, such jars feel less like utilitarian tools and more like riddles scattered in uncomfortable places, each daring us to decide whether accidental discovery or something more deliberate was at play. Supporters suggest that the battery, like the Greek machine, fits a wider pattern. Knowledge that seems to bloom early, then vanish into obscurity before reappearing centuries later as modern discovery Rome itself once held recipes for concrete that hardened underwater and remained unyielding for millennia, stronger in some cases than what we pour today. Damascus swordsmiths fashioned blades of steel, whose molecular structure has defied reverse engineering despite endless analysis. South American builders raised walls of stone on mountains, stones cut with such clean accuracy that blades of grass cannot slip between them. Each case is burdened with the same accusation. Tools too advanced for the accepted chapters of history, achievements scattered like abandoned blueprints left for others to trip upon in later centuries. Perhaps the sharpest example is rolled parchment spread before navigators in the Ottoman Empire. Drawn in 1513 by Admiral Piri Reis, his map traces coastlines known and then unknown, fragments of South America drawn with remarkable accuracy, and more troubling, the outline of Antarctica long before voyagers touched its shores. Even more curious, the map hints at landforms beneath the ice itself, shapes that only radar in the 20th century could confirm. Mainstream explanations view the map as compilation, borrowed from older charts of Europe and explorers. Yet to imagine how such detail of a frozen continent arrived in 1513 demands faith in cartographers who could not see what their own eyes had never reached. Some whisper that Piri copied records far older than even he knew, fragments of a tradition lost to fire and conquest, preserved in a single Ottoman library like a ghost carried forward through ink. Artifacts like these have gathered under an umbrella category sometimes called OOP arts, shorthand for out-of-place artifacts. They are curiosities that refuse to sit comfortably along the staircase of progress. In the conventional structure of history, technology climbs upward in regular steps: stone, bronze, iron, industrial, digital. Yet OOPARTS scatter themselves like unpredictable staircases leading to empty landings. They suggest someone climbed higher, briefly, then retreated, pulling away the ladder on their way down. Critics dismiss this as misreading, as wonder conjured from incomplete evidence, arguing that each anomaly has mundane explanation: lost craftsmanship, exaggeration, distortion carried by time. But the clustering bothers some researchers. Why do these accidents of preservation arise only around inventions that, if pursued, would have transformed their age? The pattern invites another reading, that these objects are breadcrumbs, scattered clues asking whether humanity would notice contradictions within its own narrative. If Earth functions as a great test, such anomalies might not be accidents but deliberate implants, designed to measure curiosity against complacency. Confronted with gears too fine, maps too precise, jars producing impossible current, do we ask questions? Do we pursue the irregularities? Or do we accept the dull reassurance that all can be explained away with enough patience? The curiosity itself may be the variable under study, while the objects serve as instruments quietly scoring our willingness to investigate beyond accepted lines. Others stretch further and suggest these items may not even belong to this round of human civilization. They could be fossils not of living beings, but of knowledge, remains of earlier waves erased by collapse or reset. Our current species might not be the first to walk the stairway of science, high enough to touch electricity or astronomy. If mass extinctions and collapses serve as resets, as we have already explored, then perhaps these strange objects slipped across the reset line, survivors from worlds humanity no longer remembers. A Roman blade that cuts through centuries might then be less an invention and more a reminder, evidence that someone had already played this round and left behind one small score marked in steel. There is a strange poignancy here. If you listen close, each artifact feels like a whisper through corridors that are supposed to stay tidy and labelled. The Antikythera gears tick without moving. The Baghdad jar sits heavy with unspent charge. The Piri Reis parchment seems to hold memories of coasts older than ink itself. They are quiet anomalies, yet in their quiet they bend the shape of what we thought history was. Critics counter by pinning each down to conventional frameworks, insisting there is no grand conspiracy, merely human skill underestimated by later ages. Still, the sense lingers that the picture is incomplete. Too many broken pieces pointing upward to an image we cannot yet assemble. In the hush of a gallery after closing, the artifacts feel less like relics and more like questions. Who leaves such questions lying in plain sight scattered across millennia? Some whisper of ancient minds reaching genius we continue to underestimate. Others suggest guiding hands, watchers seeding the ground with hints, and recording how long it takes for us to turn and notice. And if knowledge from earlier cycles lies fossilized in these jars and gears, then the puzzle extends not just backward in time but forward, toward our own choices, and whether what we build today will survive long enough to be rediscovered in a museum 1,000 years on. The shadows between the display cases seem to lean in then, as though the artifacts are not the only things being observed. What watchers measure may not be the objects themselves, but the way we respond to their quiet impossibility. High above the streets of Babylon, on the flat top of a ziggurat, a small group of men stood in the night air. The bricks under their sandals still held the day's warmth, radiating faint heat into the soles of their feet. One man steadied a damp clay tablet in his left hand, a reed stylus in his right, while the sky stretched out above like an endless dark sea. From that sea came a visitor, a streak of fire arcing across the distance, bright enough to cast pale shadows down the stone steps. It was a comet, but no one gasped or prayed aloud. Instead, they recorded its path with calm precision. Each degree was measured, each mark pressed into clay with care. To us it might look like awe, but to them it was accounting, a celestial entry in a book kept by watchers of Earth's upper realm. The glow faded, the last ember's tail curved out of sight, but the mark remained, drying on clay, as if the universe had been caught filling out its own ledger. Astronomers were not born in observatories with glass domes and polished brass instruments. They began as villagers on mud terraces tracking the unexplainable. Over centuries, the human habit of staring upward turned into ritual, then into record, and finally into science. But the emotional weight never left. Halley's Comet, when it returned in medieval Europe, left entire towns murmuring that the sky itself had passed judgment. Paintings from the time capture citizens frozen with fear, priests holding the book, rulers glancing upward with unease. To them, the flame in the heavens was no simple rock-venting gas. It was a message. Some later took comfort when the famous streak returned predictably, but the first glance carried terror. Centuries away, on another continent, the Leonid meteor storm streaked across North American skies so densely that a single dawn saw tens of thousands of shooting stars. Native tribes saw prophecy written in each trail, signs of transition, warnings of upheaval. These were universal signals, timed so perfectly they managed to unite distant peoples, not through contact with each other, but through synchronized awe and dread sent from above. Among the most extraordinary of these shared events are eclipses, when light falters at midday. For a few minutes, the sun hides behind its smaller companion, and the entire world seems to shift its balance. The air cools against the skin, birds fall briefly silent, and human millions lift their faces together. The moon happens to be both 400 times smaller than the sun and 400 times closer, allowing them to overlap with eerie perfection. This is no accident of perception. It is geometry concealed within motion. Ancient Chinese records note court astronomers predicting eclipses with anxious precision, for a missed forecast could cost them not only respect but their lives. Entire civilizations shaped rituals around that sliding shadow, treating it as a test from the heavens. Today, scientists explain paths and durations with software, but the feeling remains unchanged. Millions gather under the same darkened sky, strangers bonded by the same chill moment when the day is undone. If one were to craft an experiment forcing consciousness to pause, reflect, and unite, no tool is more effective than this tidy alignment of disks. Another puzzle whispers farther above, in permanent orbit. Tales circulate of an enigmatic object hovering unseen by ordinary watchers, but captured on occasion in photographs released by space agencies. Some have named it the Black Knight satellite, with claims placing its residency in Earth's skies for over 13,000 years. To believers, this is no scrap of forgotten rocket metal, but a deliberate sentinel hiding in plain sight, disguised as debris among the clutter of our own machines. Images exist, dark shapes against black sky, but the official voice assures us these are discarded blankets, twisted wreckage, or optical illusions. Critics dismiss the longevity claims as fantasy, yet the story refuses to dissolve. Supporters suggest, what better hiding place for surveillance than among the very litter we scatter above ourselves? The stars are full of noise, but a disguised watcher would be overlooked, dismissed by those eager for normal explanations. The silence of the universe itself deepens the suspicion. For decades, large dishes have spun across darkened landscapes, carried by the hope that some distant civilization would leave a message on radio bands. The SETI effort recorded years of static waiting for patterns. Instead, the record remains empty. Critics argue the void proves what we suspected, that humanity is alone. Supporters raise another hypothesis. Perhaps the silence is not emptiness, but restraint. Observers might choose not to contaminate their experiment by calling attention to themselves. If Earth is a test chamber, then handing us the answer key in the form of a signal would spoil the trial. The quiet may be deliberate, a strategic withholding, ensuring that our responses remain authentic. In this interpretation, Fermi's classic paradox, where are they, is not a puzzle of absence but a feature of design. The experiment thrives only if the subjects believe themselves unassisted. Think of how many sky events arrive with perfect dramatic timing. Comets blaze during royal deaths or revolts. Eclipses darken when wars reach their peaks. Meteors rain when cultural shifts churn civilizations. Even auroras take on narrative roles, glowing brighter during periods of exploration, sparking tales of spirits dancing when entire communities redefine themselves. Some whisper that too many of these alignments land with uncanny resonance, as if outside hands press a cosmic stopwatch at particular moments. Life resets under showers of fire. Religions galvanize when midday turns to midnight. The catalogue reads, not like coincidence, but like a curriculum, lessons scheduled in spectacle. The thread links ancient charts to modern files. Sumerians pressed their star data into clay. Centuries later, governments stamped confidential across radar reports. From baked bricks to typed folders, the habit of recording atmospheric strangers never ceased. Project Blue Book, with its catalogue of glowing objects and unexplained accelerations, continues the same act once pursued by temple scribes. Note, record, preserve. Even today, pilots mark down unidentified phenomena with the same uneasy care as those scribes on the ziggurat. The language differs, but the action is identical. Human witnesses compelled to keep track of anomalies overhead. If one were charting an experiment, these data points stretch as a line through history, a chain uninterrupted by millennia. Yet the mechanics themselves are clear. Comets travel predictable ellipses. Eclipses follow calculable patterns down to seconds. Meteors shower when Earth sweeps through grains left by periodic travellers. These are not random, but their impact bypasses the physics and lands in the human mind. The terror of a medieval villager watching Halley's flame, the child gripping their parent's hand as daylight vanishes mid-morning, the farmer who reads prophecy into the streaks of Leonids. These responses transform math into meaning. That duality is what makes them ideal calibration tools. Physics provides precision, psychology provides interpretation. For those curious about a larger experiment, such events appear almost designed as synchronized pop quizzes. Picture again those Babylonian scribes, stylus biting clay as they trace a comet's descent. Their marks survive even today, their caution and curiosity pressed into artifacts dug from sand. Match those tablets against photographs from telescopes, and continuity emerges. From then until now, humanity has never stopped reacting to the signals above. Some argue they are simply natural mechanics misread by nervous eyes. Others counter that their timing is too fine, their symbolism too consistent, their effect too universal. Eclipses divide calendars into before and after. Comets mark the rise and fall of rulers. Meteor impacts shatter evolutionary chains, clearing ecological space for entirely new worlds of forms. Each one both obeys gravity and whispers meaning. For creatures built for stories, mechanical predictability does not prevent psychological destiny. Across ages and cultures, the pattern repeats. Chinese calendars preserved eclipse records spanning thousands of years. European manuscripts illustrated streaking lights as threats from a furious god. Magian scribes carved visions of flaming stars into stone, weaving them into prophecies about endings and rebirths. The spread is wide, yet the focus is narrow, events above acting as meters of fate below. Not coincidence across humanity, but resonance, echoing long past the event itself. We are a species that imprints meaning onto skies, and if the skies provided programmed signals, they chose the perfect canvas. Which returns the question, what if this was intentional? If someone wanted to measure unity among diverse populations, what better device than a single shadow cast upon millions? If the watcher needed to gauge fear, wonder, or cooperation, a comet suffices. If the test required resilience under catastrophe, a meteor impact offers it. And if the point is simply to remind a species of its fragility, auroras dancing under solar storms accomplish the lesson with eerie beauty. Some whisper we are being shown reminders at intervals, gentle or catastrophic, to see how well we answer. Our responses might be less about survival and more about awareness. The very variable theory suggests the test cultivates. The psychological responses provide their own evidence. During eclipses, strangers on highways pull over together, quiet in the same hush. During meteor storms, children point, elders recount, generations knit themselves into a shared awe. When auroras stretch into new latitudes, communities invent new stories. The pattern shows us not only celestial order, but human susceptibility. Predictable cycles masquerade as omens, and because they arrive in luminous, perfectly timed packages, we cannot help but treat them as more than mechanics. A true test must operate both at measurable scales and in the inner chambers of mind. Celestial events demonstrate mastery in both. The rhythm of lights and shadows builds toward an unsettling possibility. If celestial events truly operate as calibration signals, then whoever understands orbital mechanics well enough to predict them also understands human psychology well enough to employ them. This would imply a guiding intelligence, not interfering directly, but setting up events to recur where and when they matter most. It paints a picture of humanity gathered again and again at night, staring upward as though on cue, responding without fail to lights cast for the purpose of gauging reactions. The laboratory in this reading is not hidden underground or sealed in glass, but stretched wide across the Earth's sky, whispered through shadows, lights, flares, and silence. Each time the pattern unfolds, our ancestors and we ourselves respond with a mixture of fear, reverence, and curious record-keeping. That is the data left behind: clay tablets, woodblock prints, photographs, radar logs. The tests are ongoing, the responses archived, and now the frame widens further, for if celestial shows serve as calibration, they are but preludes. When shadows end, when air warms again after an eclipse, when meteors burn themselves away, they reveal a harsher truth. Some signals do not only measure, they reset. And that brings the story to the edge of extinction, where lights in the sky mark not reminders, but endings. The question lingers. If skies test our unity, what happens when the next message arrives shaped not in light, but in ruin? Grass pushes between cracks of marble where senators once argued policy. A ruined amphitheatre groans in the wind, stone arches hollow where cheers once thundered. Nearby, in the countryside, a farmer bends at dawn. His wooden plough is simple, weathered, and far older in design than the politics that collapsed around him. Rome's fall wasn't a sudden night of fire, but a slow dimming, unravelling hidden in daily routine. One man planting seeds became the quiet echo of an empire that had, in its ambition, exhausted the conditions that held it upright. Civilizations can be read not only as nations, but as modules in a long experiment. Each brings power consolidated at its centre, growth outward until the edges fray, then strain under resources thinning. From the fertile plains where Mesopotamian kings scripted their authority to the stone cities of the Maya, where priests timed rituals by the skies, the arc repeats. The Khmer Empire once projected grandeur through temples and irrigation channels, yet water, its great advantage, turned unstable, erasing power when climate shifted. These aren't isolated curiosities, they are patterns: expansion, stress, collapse, renewal. Like test runs replaying with different tools but identical conditions. Historians trace the cycles with mathematical clarity. Empires centralise, often under mythical or divine authority, spreading governance across wider and wider terrain. The expansion generates wealth, but thins stability. Traders demand longer roads. Farmers extend into narrower margins of soil. Armies stretch supply networks beyond repair. Collapse rarely comes as a surprise. It arrives with grim predictability. To some scholars, this appears mechanical rather than personal, as though a code governs societies as firmly as biology governs bodies. We might call it invisible programming. Expansion has limits. Push far enough, and the decline feels built into the rise. What unsettles observers most is that civilizations separated by oceans mirrored each other. The Maya, who carved stele in Central America, show declines echoing patterns of Rome. Walled cities abandoned as farming faltered resemble the fields of Europe once left barren by mismanaged grain. The Bronze Age collapse, when inland trade shattered across the Mediterranean, left a silence similar in shape to modern supply chain weaknesses. Critics argue that human behaviour explains it. Greed, mismanagement, blind repetition. Supporters of a broader hypothesis counter that the mirroring feels too exact. Remote societies that never touched one another nevertheless traced identical arcs, as though guided by external parameters rather than mere coincidence. Consider the phenomenon of knowledge that appears, vanishes, and then resurfaces centuries later. Roman engineers could mix concrete that hardened under seawater and endured storms their successors could not match for 1,000 years. After the empire fell, the recipe slipped into silence. When rediscovered, it emerged almost as if held back until the timing was right. The Maya tracked planets with advanced calculations, yet their astronomical skill lapsed when cities were abandoned. Later societies reclaimed similar insights with startling ease, as though the archive was not erased but waiting. Some whisper that knowledge itself is preserved and released in stages rationed across eras. From ruin often emerges advancement. Europe, out of Rome's shadow, adjusted its ploughs, reshaped fields, and doubled food yields. After the Maya collapse, smaller city-states rebuilt with new water systems that improved efficiency over their forebears. These leaps suggest civilizations are forced through fire to generate refinement. Failure lays the soil for innovation more durable than fragile expansion. Renewal is baked into the reset. Survivors are tasked with improvement, not just continuation. It is as if collapse acts less like disaster and more like pruning. Fragments of older tales reinforce this suspicion. Atlantis, always described as advanced then undone by its own imbalance, served as warning, but also as memory. The younger Dryas impact theory imagines a sudden disaster rewriting human timelines, raising the possibility of cultures wiped clean, with only faint artifacts left scattered. Ancient flood stories, across cultures from Mesopotamia to the Andes, preserve consistent elements of annihilation followed by reconstruction. Perhaps these are allegories, or perhaps they are breadcrumbs, traces of earlier runs of the same test, left with just enough evidence for later societies to stumble upon. Patterns show in the present as well. Trade networks fray under pressure. Cities tighten supply chains for speed, but lose resilience when disruptions appear. Social media divides as sharply as religious schisms once fractured empires. Climate strain alters coastlines, echoing ancient water crises. The challenges are familiar because they are repetitions of conditions long rehearsed. Our global civilization may not be witnessing something unprecedented so much as replaying older steps on a stage widened to planetary scale. The experiment's variables are the same, only the backdrop has changed. Some theorists whisper an unsettling idea. Collapse does not mark failure but serves as measurement. Observers, if such exist, might not score by how long a civilization endured at its peak, but by how quickly it recovered once systems failed. They might look to preservation of the knowledge across darkness, or to how creative adaptation blossoms under scarcity. Duration alone may matter less than resilience, the ability to rise again not identical but transformed. Collapse, then, becomes a time of assessment. Renewal is the data point. If that is true, then suffering woven into these cycles is not incidental. It is designed condition, a controlled variable that tests adaptability. Civilizations react with endurance or fracture irretrievably. This suggests something more deliberate than accident at work, the engineering of difficulty, repeated across scales, to see not whether societies soar but how they rebuild. The ruin of the Forum, the silence of Maya plazas, the vanished roads of Mesopotamia. Each might not be tragedy viewed from above, but part of calibration. Which leaves a question that lingers at the edge of all these echoes. What mechanism requires consistent measurement through collapse, and for whom is the data gathered? The ruins whisper that the testing continues. The hour is late. A hospital corridor quiets to a single fluorescent flicker, while inside one dim room machines speak in flat rhythms. The steady beeping marks out a fragile life. Beside the bed, a patient breathes with effort, chest straining for each gasp, face lined with exhaustion that cannot be willed away. There is no difference between this room in New York tonight and what might have been found in Thebes 3,000 years ago, when healers fumbled with poultices while someone's family waited in despair. Pain is as ancient as breath itself. It arrives without choice, lingers as long as it pleases, and shapes every story we know. Suffering is not scattered chaos, but behaves with the weight of law, as fixed as gravity pressing against your bones. Every culture has encountered it without exception. Children go hungry in different dialects, but feel the same ache in their bellies. Grief cuts equally whether under a clay roof or behind glass towers. To the impartial observer, one might argue that suffering looks less like an accident of evolution and more like a principle woven into the design. If Earth is a stage, then pain is its most reliable cue, keeping rhythm regardless of the actors or the costumes. Some whisper that this is the most subtle clue of all, that the test is less about triumph and more about endurance. Paradise, after all, teaches nothing. If struggle were absent, then loyalty, sacrifice and courage would hang as empty words. Paradise would measure no depths, reveal no strength. But an environment seeded with pain generates data. It shows whether a person clings to self-interest or turns outward toward care. Supporters suggest this is the very purpose, that no system meant for cultivation would choose ease when difficulty is the sharper tool. In this frame, Earth resembles not a gift garden, but a proving ground. Consider how suffering pulls intimacy into light. A mother leaning over a feverish child chooses to lose sleep so another might live. A stranger in the midst of famine passes half a loaf of bread knowing his own stomach growls. A neighbourhood submerged by floodwaters builds makeshift rafts, pulling families to higher ground when authorities falter. These are not gestures that arise during ease. They demand cost. Each decision in hardship reveals something that cannot be rehearsed. And possibly this is the metric any imagined observer waits to record. Not what comforts we enjoy, but what choices we carve when comfort disappears. But look carefully and you find that pain itself is protean, shifting shape as soon as we master one form. Antibiotics broke the terror of infection, yet soon anxiety and despair surged into headlines as mental well-being cracked under different pressures. Agriculture, sharpened by industry, conquered famine in many lands, but climate displacement now creates new hunger in places once fertile. Every advance seems to close a door while another one creaks open. Some whisper the suspicion that this is deliberate calibration, as though the system is wired to renew challenges whenever one is solved. Technology moves and suffering follows. The pattern of escalation leans toward uncanny timing. When plagues once ravaged entire villages, endurance was measured through survival of the body. When medicine began to manage those threats, crises turned inward, challenging resilience of the mind. Each era seems to face a puzzle appropriate for its level of progress. Did the ages of subsistence test the bond between families? Does the digital age pressure empathy across screens, asking if compassion can cross bandwidth as it did rivers? Observers who suspect a test argue this is the hidden design. The variable changes to match the subject's growth. Religions have long framed this same rhythm. In Buddhist thought, suffering is marked as truth at the core of existence, not as punishment, but as teacher. In Christianity, hardship often appears as refining fire, a way to temper the soul for something greater beyond mortal days. In Islam, trials are described as tests from God, chances to show patience and sincerity, spread across centuries and continents, separate in theology, but echoing the same frame. Life not as playground, but as proving course. When traditions separated by oceans and epochs reach the same conclusion independently, the resonance feels difficult to ignore. Even outside organised doctrine, indigenous tales often treat difficulty as initiatory. Young warriors endured fasting and exposure not as cruelty, but as key to wisdom. Villages preserved stories of floods, famines, and exile not to terrify, but to show the lessons those events forced on the people who endured them. Eastern philosophies often point to pain as the shadow that makes awareness sharp, urging seekers to recognise sorrow as accompaniment to joy. Each system couched the message differently, yet the consensus lay clear. Hardship is essential, not incidental, to the way consciousness unfolds. If their intuition is correct, the schoolroom is not in temples but in daily aches. Hunger trains gratitude. Tragedy trains cooperation. Illness trains empathy that no lesson in ease can imitate. Responses become visible, reflections of character, as if the world keeps generating scenarios to reveal who we truly are. But if unseen observers do measure this, what data truly matters? The fact action occurs, or the motivation behind it? If you hand bread to the starving because mercy moves you, that act shines. If you hand bread to be praised, or from fear of judgment, the surface looks identical. How then could any exam distinguish spirit from performance? This is where unease sets in. If life is designed as trial, then sincerity is the rarest element to gauge. An outside view sees behaviours, but hearts are private. A society might appear compassionate in policy, but behind closed doors cruelty or suspicion may rot. Even at the level of one family, an act can be staged for others but hollow within. The question surfaces, is that invisible authenticity perhaps the real subject of study? Or is what we call intention simply a layer we add after impulses form, leaving the examiners with only patterns of conduct to score? Critics counter that pain exists because complexity requires it. Bodies must decay, ecosystems must balance, populations swell and scarcity naturally follows, but the persistence of suffering's evolution makes even skeptics pause. Why would new hardships appear in such rhythm with solved ones? Why does the ledger never empty? Some supporters suggest the alignment is too coincidental to dismiss. The progression resembles syllabi, each generation facing a lesson matched to its moment, escalating as if along a curriculum designed not for failure, but for cultivation. The cross-cultural record adds weight. Millennia back, Egyptians imagined the weighing of a heart, trial by suffering set against a feather's balance. Far East, yogic disciplines viewed detachment from earthly pain as higher clarity. Across the desert landscapes, prophets spoke of trials refining faith. On the frozen northern plains, sagas cast hardship as chiselling character worthy of the gods. No matter where on the map you place your pin, the voice says the same. Suffering is not stray chaos, it's a condition with meaning. If that pattern holds, then pain may be more deliberate than biology suggests. It acts as an intelligence test, a social test, a compassion test, all in one. Wars devastate populations, and yet what lingers in memory are also the kindnesses. Starvation ravages landscapes, and yet strangers ration food unevenly, ensuring at least one other survives. If each hardship provides these stark chances, then maybe that is the point. Life presenting violins of suffering, waiting to see who can coax notes of care. But the thought darkens further. If something observes, how can they measure true virtue? When a society donates in response to cameras, is that different from the hidden act unseen? When a leader fails yet corrects themselves only under public awareness, is that less worthy than silent perseverance? The separation between authentic and artificial slips past data. Perhaps the real calibration lies not only in numbers or behaviour, but in some quality consciousness itself emits when aligned with genuine mercy. Supporters whisper that this is what the test might chase, not the act, but the resonance behind it. Which threads back to the deeper question, what of free will? Suffering alone defines the stage, but the role we play might be either authentic choice or conditioned reflex. Do we endure pain kindly because it is engraved in social teaching, or because something inherent in us pushes toward empathy? Observers may hope to see that difference in the human record, but if awareness of observation alters an act, then the test loops upon itself. And in that loop, the question prolongs without neat answer. Are we choosing with freedom, or simply performing responses pre-programmed for us? What measures us may not be the suffering itself, but what roots those choices unseen. The laboratory clock ticks softly past midnight. A reel-to-reel projector whirs, casting pale light across white walls, and a row of psychologists hunched in their chairs. On the screen, a grainy film flickers. Ordinary volunteers in button-down shirts push levers marked with numbers. Each click sends what they believe are rising jolts of electricity into another person hidden behind a partition. The subject grimaces, hesitates, then presses the switch again when a calm figure in a lab coat tells them to proceed. The cries from the unseen learner grow louder, panicked, and then stop altogether. 65 out of 100 follow the instructions to the end. The room falls into a hush. What they are watching is not performance, but a study that unsettled the very idea of free will. This scene, drawn from the Milgram obedience experiment in the 1960s, sits at the heart of moral uncertainty. If humans, when told by authority, inflict harm they believe to be real, what does that say about the authenticity of conscience? The numbers reveal something troubling. Most people choose obedience, even when the command collides with their sense of right and wrong. For anyone wondering if Earth itself functions as a form of test, this footage looks less like data from one institution, and more like evidence of a larger puzzle. If unseen observers evaluate human conduct, how could they ever separate genuine virtue from mere compliance? Does a soldier who refuses immoral orders demonstrate moral courage? Or does the one who obeys, fearing punishment, earn credit for loyalty? The core dilemma is simple but sharp. Suppose the test measures whether humans can act with integrity under pressure. In that case, a person following rules out of fear might appear virtuous on the outside but hollow within. Meanwhile, someone who breaks those rules for the sake of compassion risks punishment, yet demonstrates conviction. Which one would count as genuine success? The problem echoes across cultures, yet Milgram's results anchor it in plain numbers. Authority alone bends conscience in most. It blurs the line between authentic moral agency and the reflex of compliance. Religious traditions quietly wrestle with this same tension, though they phrase it in language of divinity rather than psychology. In some frameworks, obedience to sacred law is the highest form of righteousness. To follow commandments regardless of personal preference marks true devotion. In others, the emphasis rests on free will, the choice to act with compassion even when it breaks from letter of the law adherence. Both positions can be seen as separate modules within the same test. If Earth's conditions are designed, then perhaps traditions of obedience and traditions of independence are set beside each other as contrasting exercises, meant to observe different forms of moral reasoning. What if the observers, real or imagined, value moments far subtler than rote compliance? Some suggest the hidden scale recognizes those who take risks for authentic good. A nurse who slips medicine to a patient despite administrative prohibition. A villager who shelters a stranger even when authorities outlaw hospitality. In these actions, the subject violates rules yet preserves morality. That tension between sanctioned behaviour and authentic integrity may mark the line between programmed obedience and true exercise of conscience. If the grading exists, perhaps it emerges not in following directions but in questioning them. The difficulty lies in visibility. External action carries no label. When someone shares food, the gesture could stem from fear of judgment, desire for reputation, or genuine compassion. The hand extends, but the motive is hidden. For any potential evaluator, this creates the intention versus action conundrum. Compliance looks uniform, but authenticity is invisible. Action alone cannot prove internal reasoning. If this is the real metric, then the test is not about outward conduct, but about the unseen spark within, the choice animated from inside rather than imposed from above. Earth presents loophole traps in daily form. The merchant who cheats with scales earns a short-term advantage while eroding trust in the long run. The ruler who silences dissent strengthens grip for a year but undermines legitimacy for generations. These choices lure with comfort, yet lead to long decay. Such snares feel structured into the environment, recurring across cultures: famine tempting hoarding, war tempting cruelty, politics tempting betrayal. Observers, or perhaps the pattern of life itself, watch not simply who survives these snares, but who resists them. Failure to pass the trap may not bring immediate collapse, but it corrodes the deeper record of the subject's real moral state. The most striking traps are those staged in private moments. Moments when no one appears to watch become the sharpest questions. The student who cheats when the proctor looks away, the official who slips funds from unseen accounts, the colonist who claims land under cover of night. These are trick questions within the exam. Winning is not the measure. How one wins is. If the subject believes the act hidden, conscience faces its purest trial. In the flicker of secrecy, the test asks whether integrity extends beyond external recognition. But here the paradox tightens. If humans learn they are always observed by systems, whether divine, cosmic, or technological, the awareness itself alters behaviour. Knowing one is recorded invites performance. Genuine choice turns shadowed. If the experiment measures free will, then the knowledge of an experiment contaminates the sample. This recursive loop threatens to erase authenticity. Act without awareness, and the choice may be pure. Act with awareness, and it may only be pretense. Some whisper that in such a case observers could never truly grade morality, only its performance under the idea of surveillance. This authentic choice paradox forces a deeper consideration. Unless the test measures beyond visible actions, it cannot distinguish sincerity from fear-driven behaviour. Yet if the test somehow reaches inward, into the realm of intention, then the true subject under examination is not ethics but consciousness itself. For ethics are frameworks shaping action, but consciousness is the arena where deliberation, fear, compassion, and defiance mix in real time. Perhaps the very reason the experiment called Earth exists is to refine awareness to the point where genuine, independent choice becomes possible, more than conditioned obedience, more than hidden self-interest. The Milgram films pause with a sharp click of projector reels. Volunteers step back from levers, some shaken, some proud, just to have followed directions. To the psychologist, the footage proves how authority can steer a person against their own moral compass. To our larger speculation, it opens a darker space. If unseen watchers of Earth took this same recording as data, would they see obedience, weakness, or potential? And as midnight deepens in that lab, the unanswered question thickens the air. If real moral agency defines the test, then perhaps no planet-wide trial measures survival or technology at all. Perhaps the only outcome being observed is whether consciousness itself learns to walk its razor-thin path between rule and freedom, between obedience and choice. The experiment bends inward, pointing not toward external triumph, but toward the quiet mystery of awareness. And that mystery, not rule-following or conquest, may be the true variable under observation. A child leans over the edge of a pond. The air hangs cool and heavy, carrying the faint smell of rain-soaked grass. Ripples spread outward as their fingertips skim the surface, bending the reflection into wavering copies of themselves. For a long moment they simply stare, realizing in a quiet spark of awareness that it is not just an image staring back, but something stranger. The mind that observes feels separate from the body reflected in water. A sense of I appears, small, unmeasurable, yet undeniable. That instant may be one of the first glimpses of the rarest phenomenon known to the universe: consciousness. What if everything about Earth's setup, its orbital balance, magnetic fields, the long cycles of life and death, was never about survival or even about developing tools? What if the true aim was to create a stage on which self-awareness could form? Rocks persist for billions of years but never consider their condition. Stars burn and collapse without wondering why they shine. Yet here on this fragile planet, minds imagine futures that do not exist and mourn losses that have not yet arrived. Some whisper that the improbable balance of Earth was never tuned for biology alone, but for cultivating the peculiar spark of introspection. Awareness sits strangely in the fabric of reality. We know how organisms breathe, metabolize, divide, and perish, but how a neural pattern translates into a moment of inner experience remains deeply unresolved. Philosophers often describe this as the hard problem of consciousness, not explaining reactions or learned behavior, but explaining the felt quality of experience, what it is like to see red or to feel grief. That gap between physical process and subjective awareness forms one of the deepest puzzles science has yet faced. Ancient thinkers wrestled with the same mystery. Plato's allegory of the cave likened human perception to watching shadows on a wall, suggesting what we observe is only a reflection of deeper truths. Descartes, centuries later, reached his moment of conviction in "I think, therefore I am," building the primacy of self-awareness as the one certainty that could not be doubted. Beneath cultural differences, a thread endures. It is not knowledge itself that defines humanity, but the recognition of knowing. To notice one's own thought is to occupy a category even the brightest star cannot touch. Religion carried these clues in ways philosophy alone could not contain. Hindu traditions described Atman, the inner self, joined ultimately with Brahman, the whole of reality. Christianity taught of the soul, indestructible and distinct from the body, the vessel of eternal remembrance. Islam spoke of the Ruh, the breath of spirit, bestowed from beyond and returning at the end of life. Separate regions, separate languages, yet all converging on awareness as essence. Not blood nor cell nor breath, but consciousness itself as what passes through death unchanged. It is as though cultures scattered apart all recognize the same hidden current. Something about knowing outlasts the frame that carries it. Eastern frameworks bring another shade of interpretation. Buddhism insists on anatta, the absence of a permanent self, yet in that absence, consciousness is seen as flow, a river without owner. Identity flickers in and out like firelight, yet the stream runs onward. Again, awareness becomes the phenomenon above all else, even when its shape is interpreted differently. Across these perspectives, a constant shows itself. Awareness is the rare light, regardless of how it is named or where it is believed to continue. Modern science has reached awkwardly back to similar ground with theories like panpsychism. Rather than claim consciousness arises at a certain level of brain complexity, panpsychism suggests awareness may be fundamental, as basic as gravity or charge. Each particle perhaps contains a primitive shimmer of experience, and complex systems like human brains integrate them into the self-reflective minds we know. Critics dismiss it as philosophy too wide to test, but it answers a troubling point. If consciousness simply appeared from matter at a late stage, why does it feel irreducibly different from every other function? Treating it as woven into reality itself provides another path of explanation. Then stands the simulation hypothesis. supporters suggest our cosmos may not be physical in the traditional sense, but generated, calculated by some higher intelligence. Within that perspective, consciousness is not accidental byproduct, but the intended output. If advanced systems were programmed to see whether self-awareness could rise and flourish, then each human thought might signify success in that project. Others dismiss this as science fiction in disguise, yet even they admit that computing power grows closer to modelling entire worlds, suggesting experiments of this scale are not unimaginable. Artificial intelligence brings the dilemma closer still. Each year, machines better mimic dialogue, reasoning, and adaptation. Researchers argue over whether machines will cross from imitation into genuine subjective experience. Some believe they will never feel, only simulate. Others whisper that true sentience could emerge if the underlying architecture mirrors complexity similar to brains. If so, then our attempt to birth artificial minds may itself be part of an evaluation. Can consciousness reproduce itself in new substrates? Can awareness be taught, copied, or engineered by those already aware? If Earth is an experiment, this stage could be testing our ability to replicate its most unusual output. Consciousness also spans across generations. One century refines logic, another deepens empathy, another cultivates creative expansion. Awareness evolves not through DNA alone, but through culture, memory, and thought shared onward. Language and art become carriers. Each generation inherits not only bodies, but habits of perception. Perhaps that is the true product. Not individuals, but awareness shaped slowly across time. Some theorists call this the generational consciousness hypothesis, the idea that what endures isn't any single mind, but a collective unfolding of awareness, harvested across ages like layers in a cosmic archive. The shape of history itself seems tuned to intensify awareness. Extinctions force adaptive leaps. Catastrophes pressure societies into measures of cooperation or collapse. Philosophers across cultures recognize suffering as the sharpener of perception, the lens that carves empathy and resilience simultaneously. If what is being refined is conscious depth, then disasters, losses, and trials are not interruptions but conditions. Pain, growth, reflection. They form the crucible. The test is not survival pure and simple, but whether self-awareness grows in nuance, compassion, and imaginative reach under pressure. This brings the unsettling edge of the consciousness graduation theory, that once awareness is cultivated to a certain clarity, the experiment's goal may be complete. Extinctions were not random interruptions, but strategic resets, each forcing consciousness to shape itself differently. Human suffering in this frame is not mere accident, but part of calibration. The stakes are heavy. If awareness itself is the rarest product, then all of Earth is an incubator, and when the right intensity is reached, some result is expected. Whether that means entry into another dimension, contact with unseen observers, or simply the end of the experiment remains hidden. What purpose would such value serve? Some whisper that awareness is the one element the universe cannot generate without living systems, making it a resource in demand. Others counter that it may serve no outside function at all, simply being the frontier through which the cosmos understands itself. In one vision, human thought is harvested. In another, human thought is the universe coming to recognize its own reflection, a pond looking back at itself. Either way, the direction points toward consciousness as object at the center. To glimpse this possibility is both humbling and disorienting. One child by a pond recognizes the separation between the watcher and the mirrored body. Extend that small moment and you see history as millions of similar sparks laboring to sharpen into brighter fire. If Earth is the chamber where consciousness is coaxed into being, then every trial, every collapse, every act of creativity becomes part of a larger record. The quiet question that remains is not whether minds have formed, but why someone or something cares so deeply that they be formed at all. And if awareness is the measure, what happens once it matures? The answer could bring comfort, or it could bring erasure. At 3 a.m, a faint blue glow spills from a laptop left half open. The room is quiet except for the low whir of a fan and the tap of a restless finger sliding a trackpad. Lines of text scroll past, posts about simulation theory, arguments about physics behaving like coded scripts, links to videos promising proof. The atmosphere feels worn, fluorescent, as if this person has been cycling through the same questions for hours. The glow carries the same energy scribes once held by firelight, marking clay with stories of shadowed worlds. Now humans trace the logic of code instead of stars, but the question hasn't changed. Is the reality we see only a projection? The pattern loops back through centuries. Stories of gods who measured human lives, of watchers charting every decision, never fully disappeared with temple walls. Instead, they shifted their vocabulary. Where one culture spoke of divine scribes recording morality, another spoke of hidden satellites beaming data home. The motif remains consistent. Surveillance, judgment, the sense of being measured against unseen rubrics. Each time the symbols alter, but the structure is already familiar, echoing what came before. Some whisper this is not imagination reinventing itself, but the persistence of memory framed for each age. Simulation theory offers one of the cleanest modern mirrors of these older tales. Plato's cave described people chained to illusions, perceiving flickering forms as truth. In that allegory, only by questioning shadows could one rise to the deeper unseen world beyond the walls. Compare that to the claim of computational reality. Physics as code, your choices as scripted sequences, awareness of the underlying machinery forming a kind of awakening. The Hindu term Maya suggested a veil obscuring the absolute, just as programmers now describe reality layered with illusions held in place by rules of digital architecture. Think about the modern advocates who bring these thoughts forward. Philosopher Nick Bostrom laid out the basic argument. If advanced civilizations can simulate realities indistinguishable from base reality, and if they choose to run many, then statistically, most conscious beings would find themselves inside a simulation and not outside of it. Elon Musk has described the idea even more starkly, suggesting that the chance of us living in base reality may be 1 in billions. While critics counter these positions as speculation beyond evidence, the intrigue sustains, gathering the same devotion ancient myths once assembled in temple courtyards. Alongside these ideas lingers the story of the Black Knight satellite. Photographs in the mid-20th century sparked claims of an object orbiting Earth for 13,000 years. It has been dismissed repeatedly as space debris or fragments from early launches. Yet the narrative endures, strengthened by its reflection of older patterns, sky-dwelling monitors who keep watch across ages with patient silence. For some listeners, the satellite feels like modern iconography cloaking an ancient motif. Eternal surveillance from above, the same narrative once written as winged deities crouched at the edge of clouds. Loop the thread further, and time travel speculation emerges. Tales of future humans returning to observe their ancestors run parallel to stories where gods descended to correct or guide. The Greeks spoke of immortals walking among mortals, shaping destiny in moments of error or crisis. Today, theorists reframe that as examiners in advanced civilizations looping backwards to inspect earlier versions of themselves. The structure does not change. It is still beings from outside the script interacting with those inside, but the metaphors shift to match new worldviews. Institutional secrecy adds another echo. Ancient mystery schools locked away knowledge, releasing fragments only to initiate after careful testing. Now, secrecy manifests in government reports, classified files, redacted pages. From Roswell to Pentagon briefings on UAPS, information filters downward in controlled fragments. Some suggest this pattern is necessary if humanity is being observed. To preserve the experiment's integrity, too much awareness would contaminate results. In that reading, institutional silence is not obstruction but design, echoing hidden knowledge preserved in previous ages under different banners. Soft disclosure flows as well through entertainment. Films like The Matrix or shows like Westworld retell old themes with crisp digital imagery. You wake, the narrative says, to realize existence is a constructed performance stage. Older parables carried the same lesson. Mortal life as trial, overseen by rulers not visible to the participants. We used to call them trickster gods, divine bureaucrats, or guardian spirits. In theatres and streaming services, they reappear as programmers, artificial intelligences, and powerful corporations rewriting outcomes for subjects unaware of their condition. The psychological current beneath it remains steady. Online forums pose the same questions Plato raised in his cave. Who ensures the system runs? What criteria sort illusions from freedom? If there are gradings, what defines worthiness? Most haunting of all, if you discover you are observed, does that alter the test itself? Each discussion, whether clothed in myth, religion, or computer code, works the same knot. People search for order when faced with uncertainty, finding structure in the idea of being monitored and judged. Some supporters point toward cultural memory theory as a possible explanation. Patterns that surface again and again may not be accidents of thought, but fragments of inherited remembrance. Ancient witnesses described gods. Later one spoke of angels or star people. Now language points to simulations or satellites. Yet the bones of the story remain consistent. Perhaps myths, legends, and digital conspiracies all preserve parts of the same chronic experience. If so, each age rehearses memory through the tools it trusts most: tablets, scripture, radar, code. The possibility itself is provocative. What if nothing ever departed? The watchers who filled myths might never have left. Instead, they altered their masks, changing form as civilizations sharpened their capacity to detect patterns. If humanity moves from myth to physics, from stone idols to retinal screens, then the observers only need to shift costume to remain just out of reach. The flicker of a satellite, the hidden clauses in physics, the secrecy of a file, all float as modern attire around one enduring presence. If this is the case, then every screen lit at night, every sky watched with radar, is not searching for new beings. It is waiting to recognize old companions who never ceased recording, only learn to hide in plain sight. And perhaps this is the strange conclusion such stories edge toward. Whether framed in myth or mathematics, secrecy or cinema, the watchers have not abandoned their posts. They may simply be reflecting us, adjusting methods as our own knowledge expands, ensuring the experiment remains intact. If so, the quiet question at the heart of every sleepless search, every blue screen vigil, is not whether they exist, but how long they plan to keep watching and what they wait for us to finally understand. A red pen hovers over the last page of a cosmic exam. The paper is blank in its final box where an answer should rest. No rubric pinned to the corner, no criteria offered. Yet the moment of judgment approaches all the same, unfolding with the inevitability of ticking seconds. The image is simple but heavy. Humanity sits under the invisible hand of an evaluator we cannot see, waiting for results shaped by questions we never knew we were answering. A classroom, perhaps, where the shelves stretch as wide as galaxies. Each of us scribbles choices into the margins, unaware of how they will be read. Religious traditions were the first frameworks that placed humanity inside this imagined testing ground. The Quran describes life as a trial, one judged by God, where reward or punishment follows like the grade of a long exam. Christianity carries forward the vision of a day when each deed is weighed, salvation offered to those who met divine expectation, punishment to those who did not. These stories insist that the trial ends beyond time, where life itself is reviewed in full. Even within such frameworks, though, the problem of the grading scheme lingers. What actions matter most, how strictly mercy is applied, and whether inner motives outweigh outer gestures. The system is presented, but the rubric is not written out in human ink. Outside sacred texts, scientists speak in other terms but circle the same puzzle. For them, graduation might come through survival beyond Earth. A civilization that cannot remain confined to one fragile world will eventually fail. So, success is measured by expansion, resilience written into technologies that hold human life against vacuum or dust storms. Whether colonizing Mars or sending crews beyond the solar edge, spreading outward would prove adaptability under stress. Supporters of this framework see it as a natural exam. Those able to maintain themselves beyond their comfort zone pass the test. Those confined to a cradle perish with it. Between these poles sits another theory, that the exam does not measure territory or conquest, but what arises inside the human mind. Perhaps consciousness itself is the scorecard. Survival alone can be brute instinct, but reflection, compassion, and wonder mark awareness as something rarer. The hypothesis holds that observers, if they exist, might tune their instruments not to rockets, but to inequalities. Empathy under crisis, curiosity unprompted, imagination blooming where conditions break down. If true, then every act of kindness, every quiet choice to resist cruelty, counts for more than grand monuments. The data is not carved in stone, but embedded in consciousness itself. Consider what graduation might look like under this framework. One scenario describes contact at last. The Watchers reveal themselves, their ships, or forms beyond ships, arriving not as objects of fear, but as examiners with results in hand. Humanity, in this vision, is invited into a galactic community after proving it could endure the test. Some accounts imagine a transition even stranger, passing into dimensions not built of space at all. The shift would be like waking after a long rehearsal, a sudden movement into higher scales of being. Whether through physical ascension or subtle shift in awareness, graduation unfolds as integration, the moment we join others already long beyond this stage. There is a quieter possibility. No revelation, no sudden elevation, only humanity demonstrating that it can handle itself. In this pathway, graduation equals survival through crises, a climate brought back from the brink not by miracle, but by cooperation. Artificial intelligence managed without turning destructive. Nuclear weapons kept silent not by accident, but by discipline. Here, the grade is earned not with glory, but with perseverance. The same way small desert plants earn survival by holding water in their tissue longer than enemies expect. It is resilience as proof, the score measured in species that learn to prevent its own erasure. Yet just as there are ways to graduate, there may also be ways to fail without drama. Some whisper that the worst outcome might not be extinction, but stagnation. A civilization that survives but never evolves, minds that cease to stretch, creativity that recycles the same patterns until imagination hardens into routine. Such failure is quiet, almost invisible from within. Life continues, society endures, but awareness does not deepen. Each generation mirrors the last without surpassing it. Humanity might persist forever inside its planetary cradle, yet never write anything greater than repetition. A test failed not by fire, but by slow suffocation of possibility. Of course, history offers sterner examples too. Catastrophic resets have approached us before and may again. Nuclear annihilation once seemed a heartbeat away, a shadow over classrooms where children drilled for disasters no one could recover from. Climate collapse still gathers as a swarm of signals: melting ice, surging seas, forests silenced by heat. Supporters of existential risk theory point also to runaway technology, where tools built to improve life spiral out beyond human control. Each represents a possible terminal scenario, the exam ripped from the desk before completion, marked only with what data spilled out at the end. Civilizations serve as specimens pushed until they break, their shards studied like notes in a lab. The great paradox sits at the centre. Humanity does not know how it is being graded. We live as students without an answer key, writing essays without questions clearly posed. Perhaps compassion matters most, or perhaps survival, expansion, intelligence. Lacking criteria, every action feels meaningful yet possibly misdirected. A skyscraper might be as pointless as a sandcastle if empathy is the real metric. A meditation chant might matter more than engines if awareness is the target. Like students fumbling with unmarked essays, humanity works with intuition about what pleases the examiner, if any examiner exists at all. The thought grows darker when placed against our timeline. What if the final judgment has already begun? Each modern crisis may not be a flaw but an exam question, all arriving in sequence. Climate change asks humanity whether it can cooperate across boundaries. Artificial intelligence poses whether wisdom can keep pace with ambition. Nuclear arms measure whether restraint survives temptation. These are convergent pressures, like problems set in increasing complexity across a single test sheet. Observers, whether divine, alien, or future humans, may already have their pens in hand, recording not end results, but our responses to stress as they unfold in real time. A student might not know the grades until months later, yet when the exam ends, the results harden into record. Humanity now sits near such a precipice. Actions over decades carry weight not only for survival here, but perhaps for a more difficult scale of evaluation no one asked for. Supporters of the test hypothesis wonder whether the outcome is already tilting, shaped by choices pressed into law, technology, and culture at this very hour. Unlike myths of distant judgment days, the unsettling thought is that we stand inside one now. Picture again the pen, quivering over our page. No smile from the examiner, no hint at the correct path. The grade waits unspoken. Success could open doorways never imagined. Failure could reduce centuries of construction to footnotes and forgotten records. We cannot ask what score is required. We can only understand that every choice carries more weight than it appears. If Earth is truly a classroom, then the clock is ticking and the final bell may already be ringing. Humanity's story is not finished, but ink dries quickly. Success or erasure hangs on the strokes we're making right now. Even without proof, imagining Earth as a test sharpens how we weigh our choices. Scarcity, suffering, and loss press against us daily. Yet within those pressures, we measure not just survival, but how we respond. If the universe values anything, it might be resilience, our ability to bend without breaking, to transform hurt into clarity. Perhaps there is no distant evaluator at all. Perhaps each generation serves as the examiner, judging whether we left the world stronger or weaker for those who follow. The final question lingers then. What quality of consciousness will you pass forward into time?